The cold hospital hallway echoed with distant beeps as my father marched in, flanked by my mother and older sister. He bypassed any mention of my husband Lucas's critical condition from the accident and instead thrust a stack of medical consent forms at me. "We have to get this evaluation done right away," he declared flatly. "My name is Jordan Quinn. I am 35 years old." The way my father dismissed my grief and immediately pushed for control over my life decisions while Lucas clung to life cut deeper than the news of the crash itself. His calculated tone made it clear this was no sudden idea. That moment sparked something irreversible. Before I go on with how this unfolded, if you have ever had family, see your pain as an opportunity, like and subscribe. Comment your city and current time. I love knowing who is watching with me. I stood there, frozen phone already recording in my coat pocket, because New York lets you capture conversations you are part of without telling anyone. My father kept talking as if I were not even in the room, outlining how a quick psychiatric hold would let them step in and manage everything Lucas and I had built together over 8 years of marriage. My mother nodded along without a word of comfort, and my older sister checked her watch like the whole thing was just another appointment on her calendar. The betrayal landed in my chest like a weight I could not shake. I had always known my father viewed me as the one who needed fixing the daughter who left suburban Buffalo for a gallery job, instead of staying close and following his rules. But hearing him weaponize my husband's car accident to seize control felt like a door slamming shut on every illusion I had about family. I slipped away to the chapel downstairs and called David Dunn, the attorney Lucas had quietly recommended months earlier in case anything ever happened. David Dunn met me the next morning at his small office 2 towns over. He slid a folder across the desk and explained the irrevocable trust Lucas had set up right after our wedding. Nearly $6 million and 4 city properties in downtown Buffalo sat locked inside it. Even if a court declared me unfit tomorrow, nothing could move without both my signature and his. Lucas had seen my father's pattern coming from miles away the way he had asked for money. 4 separate times during our marriage for vague home, repairs, and family needs. David Dunn showed me the documented refusals. Then he introduced Laura Sullivan, a forensic accountant he trusted. She promised to dig into the community church records where my father had served as treasurer for 14 years. "Give me 9 days," she said. "I will find the gaps if they exist." I drove back to the family house in suburban Buffalo, feeling a fragile thread of hope for the first time since the accident. My father was awaiting on the porch. He took my car keys without asking and dropped them into his pocket. "You should not be driving right now," he said, voice smooth as if he were doing me a favor. "Stay here for a while. We will handle things." My mother had already changed the Wi-Fi password and suggested I rest upstairs where they could check on me. My older sister called on speakerphone from the city, her tone sweet as honey. "Just sign the temporary power of attorney papers, Jordan. It is what families do when someone needs help." I heard the edge beneath the words, the same edge my father had used in the hospital. That afternoon, my coworker, Emma Lawson, stopped by the house with coffee and a quiet hug. She works with me at the Buffalo Arts Center, coordinating exhibitions, and she has known me long enough to sense something was wrong. When I told her in whispers what my father was trying, she squeezed my hand and offered to be a witness if I ever needed one. "Record everything," she said. "Do not let them isolate you completely." Her support felt like the first real anchor I had. Later that evening, Travis Bennett, a church board member my father had mentioned in passing over the years, texted me out of the blue. He had heard rumors about financial questions at the upcoming annual fundraiser and wanted to meet quietly. "There are discrepancies I cannot ignore," his message read. I met him at a coffee shop the next morning, and he confirmed he would quietly support an independent review if Laura Sullivan found proof. For the first time, I realized my father had spent years building a wall of trust in our tight-knit suburban community. And now that wall was starting to show cracks. The psychiatrist my father handpicked arrived 2 days later. Dr. Christopher Brooks sat in the living room with his notebook open while my father stood by the window, arms crossed. "Your daughter has not been herself since the accident," my father told him directly, voice laced with concern that felt rehearsed. "We need a full evaluation to make sure she can manage her affairs." Dr. Christopher Brooks asked gentle questions designed to build a case. I answered calmly, giving him nothing but my father's eyes never left me. He leaned in at one point and said with a sharp little smile, "See, doctor, she is shutting down, just like I warned you." The jab landed exactly where he intended. By the time the session ended, my father had already scheduled a follow-up for the next afternoon and suggested I sign a temporary order giving my older sister authority over medical decisions. "It is only for 48 hours, he said, as if that made it reasonable. "We cannot risk you making choices you will regret later." My Aunt Nicole Price called that night from 3 hours away. She had been cut off from the family years earlier after she blocked my father from doing something similar to my grandmother. "He is using the same playbook," she told me. "Isolation first, then control." Her words gave me strength. But when I hung up, I found my mother standing in the doorway. "Your father only wants what is best," she said quietly. "Do not fight us on this." The next morning, my car was still missing from the driveway, the Wi-Fi still blocked, and my older sister arrived with Gabriel Mitchell, her fiancé, in tow. Gabriel Mitchell shook my hand and offered condolences, but once he stepped outside, my older sister leaned across the table. "Just cooperate," she whispered. "The wedding deposits are due soon, and we all know you do not need that money right now." My father walked in at that exact moment and nodded. "Your sister's right. Family takes care of family." The pressure kept building, each demand wrapped in concern, each jab from my father designed to remind me I had never quite measured up. I lay awake that night, listening to the house settle around me, wondering how much longer I could hold my ground. Laura Sullivan needed 6 more days for the full report. Travis Bennett had promised to bring the board into it quietly. Emma Lawson texted me a single word of encouragement every morning. Yet every time I tried to leave the house, my father appeared with another reason I should stay. Another reminder that I was not stable enough to be on my own. The evaluation appointment loomed for the following afternoon, and I could feel the net tightening. Then my older sister let something slip during dinner that made my blood run cold. She mentioned a spreadsheet she had already started for their wedding budget, with line items clearly pulled from what they expected to access once the guardianship went through. My father smiled across the table and said, "See, we are all thinking ahead for you." I realized then that the isolation was not just physical. He was turning the people around me, the community that had known me my whole life, into extensions of his control. And the worst part was, I still did not know if I could stop it before it became permanent. The next morning, my father summoned me down to the kitchen before I had even finished getting dressed. My mother stood by the counter stirring cream into her coffee without meeting my eyes, and my older sister was already on speakerphone from the city, her voice bright and insistent. My father slid the evaluation paperwork across the table toward me the moment I sat down. "We are not waiting any longer," he said, voice low and final, the way he used to announce church budget cuts when I was a teenager. "Dr. Christopher Brooks will be here at noon today for the follow-up, and you will sign the temporary order, giving your older sister authority over your medical choices. This is not a discussion, Jordan. Your husband is fighting for his life, and you are clearly not thinking straight. I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach, but I kept my face calm. I had spent the night rereading the trust documents David Dunn sent over by secure email on my phone. Nearly $6 million and 4 prime downtown Buffalo properties, all protected. My father had no idea how ironclad Lucas had made everything 8 years ago, right after our quiet courthouse wedding. Yet here he was, initiating every move like the family patriarch, who had never once asked how I was actually feeling. My older sister jumped in on the call. "It is only until you are stable again," she said sweetly. "Gabriel and I have the wedding deposits coming up, and we all know Lucas would want us to help each other." My father nodded as if she had spoken gospel. "Exactly. Family steps up when one of us is weak." That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from Sarah Reynolds, the kind-hearted nurse who had been on duty the night Lucas was brought in after the accident. She had overheard my father's initial hospital demand and had quietly slipped me her number the next day. "Saw your father leave the floor yesterday," her message read. "If you need someone outside the family to vouch that you are coherent and grieving normally, I am here. Do not let them trap you." Her words gave me the smallest breath of air in a house that was starting to feel like a cage. I excused myself to the back porch under the pretense of fresh air and called Laura Sullivan instead. She answered on the first ring. "I have something," she said without greeting. "The church's public filings show incoming donations of $220,000 over the last 36 months, but your father's internal reports only account for $182,000. That leaves a gap of $38,000 routed through 17 separate transfers to a personal account that traces straight back to him." Classic quiet skimming. My pulse kicked hard. $38,000 over nearly 3 years, small enough to hide in a community church where everyone trusted my father as the man who had balanced the books for 14 straight years. Laura promised the full certified report in 6 more days, just before the annual fundraiser, where he was scheduled to give the treasurer's speech. "Travis Bennett on the board is already looping in Pastor Stephen Cole," she added. "They are willing to let me present it as a transparency update if I can get the numbers airtight." I hung up, feeling the first real shift of power, but when I walked back inside, my father was waiting in the hallway. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "No one," I lied softly. He stepped closer. "You have always been the one who runs off and makes things harder than they need to be. This time, you will stay put and let us protect what is left of your life." The jab stung exactly as he intended, reminding me I had never been the reliable daughter in his eyes. 2 days blurred into a haze of controlled isolation. My mother changed the Wi-Fi password again and suggested I hand over my laptop for safekeeping. My older sister drove up with Gabriel Mitchell, her fiancé, and the 4 of us sat through another awkward dinner where my father kept steering the conversation toward how overwhelmed I must feel. Gabriel tried to stay neutral, asking gentle questions about my work at the Buffalo Arts Center, but my older sister cut him off. "She does not need to think about exhibitions right now," she said, patting his arm. "Our family has this handled." Later, when Gabriel stepped outside for a call, my older sister lowered her voice. "Just sign the papers tonight. The wedding venue wants another $12,000 by the end of the week, and you know you are not in any shape to manage money." My father overheard and chimed in immediately. "Your older sister is right. Sign it, or we will have no choice but to go to court and let a judge decide how unfit you have become." I recorded every word on my phone. Heart hammering while Sarah Reynolds texted me again from the hospital. She had spoken to Emma Lawson, my co-worker at the Art Center, and both women offered to write statements if it came to a hearing. Their quiet alliance felt like the only light in the growing dark. Then my Aunt Nicole Price called late that night from her place 3 hours north. She had been erased from family gatherings years earlier after she stopped my father from pulling the same guardianship trick on my grandmother. He is repeating the exact pattern, she whispered. Isolation, then the doctor, then the papers. I have copies of the old filings if you need them. Her evidence arrived by overnight mail the next morning, and I hid the folder under my mattress like contraband. The pressure kept ratcheting up. Dr. Christopher Brooks returned for the second session, and this time my father sat right beside me on the couch, one hand resting on my shoulder like a warning. "Tell the doctor how you keep forgetting simple things," he prompted, voice-dripping concern. When I answered clearly and without hesitation, my father's smile never reached his eyes. "See how she is fighting this," he said to the doctor. "That is the instability I was talking about." The words landed like a slap, but I held my tongue. Afterward, my father pulled me aside in the hallway. "You have 48 hours to sign voluntarily," he said, voice low and sharp. "After that, I file the petition myself, and the whole community will hear how you crumbled after the accident. Do not make me do this the hard way." I spent that night staring at the ceiling, weighing every option. Laura Sullivan texted that she would have the final audit ready in 4 days right before the fundraiser. Travis Bennett confirmed Pastor Stephen Cole had agreed to let the presentation happen as a surprise transparency segment. Emma Lawson offered to drive me anywhere I needed to go if I could slip out. Sarah Reynolds even volunteered to meet me at a neutral coffee shop to sign an affidavit about my mental state the night of the accident. Yet every time I tried to leave the house, my father appeared with another reason. I should stay, another reminder that fighting him would only prove I was unstable. The net was closing faster than I could widen the holes. Then, the morning of the third day, my father walked into the living room, holding a fresh set of court papers, and looked me dead in the eye. "The hearing is scheduled for next week," he announced calmly. "Unless you sign right now, the judge will hear everything, and you will lose more than just control of your husband's estate. You will lose the last shred of respect this town still pretends to have for you." My hands started to shake for the first time in days. The fundraiser was only 4 days away, and I still did not know if the evidence would land before my father forced everything into open court. Sarah Reynolds had promised to stand with me. Emma Lawson was ready with her statement, and my Aunt Nicole Price had already mailed her old documents, but my father's ultimatum hung in the air like a blade. He had initiated every single step, turned my grief into his opportunity, and now he was daring me to push back in front of the entire community. I did not know if I could stop the collapse before it swallowed everything Lucas had tried to protect. The days leading up to the fundraiser felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss I could not see the bottom of. My father called a family meeting the night before and laid down the law in that calm, commanding voice he reserved for the church board decisions. "Tomorrow at the event, you will sit quietly and let the adults handle the presentation." He told me, eyes locked on mine, while my mother nodded beside him and my older sister scrolled through her phone, pretending not to listen. "Any outburst from you and the whole town will see exactly how unstable you have become since the accident. This is your last chance to show you can be reasonable." He had initiated every single ultimatum, every restriction, every jab, turning my grief into his personal project of control. And now he was daring the community to judge me instead of him. I spent that sleepless night reviewing the final audit Laura Sullivan had emailed me at midnight. $38,000 skimmed over 36 months, 17 precise transfers, all documented and traced. Travis Bennett had already briefed Pastor Stephen Cole and Cynthia Hayes, the longtime church administrator who had quietly grown suspicious of the missing receipts, agreed to stand beside Laura during the presentation. Sarah Reynolds, the nurse who had seen my father's hospital maneuvering firsthand, sent me a short message offering to speak if things turned ugly. Emma Lawson from the Arts Center promised to be in the audience as moral support. Even my Aunt Nicole Price confirmed she would drive down and sit in the back row, ready, with her old guardianship files, if needed. I had allies, now people who had stepped up, because they saw what my father refused to acknowledge. Yet the fear still sat heavy in my chest because he had spent 14 years building his reputation as the reliable treasurer, and small-town loyalty ran deep. The fundraiser hall was packed with 180 guests when we arrived. My father took the stage first in his best suit, smiling that practice smile he used for every annual report. He launched into his usual speech about trust and community, then invited Laura Sullivan forward as part of the new Transparency Initiative. "We believe in full accountability," he said, smoothly initiating the very segment that would expose him without realizing it. Laura connected her laptop, and the screen filled with the real numbers. $220,000 received versus $182,000 accounted for. The $38,000 gap. The 17 transfers. The personal account in my father's name. Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Patricia Lang, one of the long-time neighbors who had always praised my father's dedication, covered her mouth. Roger Klein, another board member who had stayed silent until that moment, stood up and asked for the microphone. My father's face went pale, but he tried to recover. "There must be some mistake," he said, voice cracking for the first time I could remember. "I have always put this church first." Pastor Stephen Cole stepped forward and thanked Laura for the independent review, then quietly announced that the board would handle the matter internally to avoid scandal. No criminal referral, no immediate police involvement, just a quiet retirement for my father and a promise to repay the funds over time. The crowd murmured, some in disbelief, others already rewriting the narrative in their heads. My father had initiated the cover-up, even in defeat, steering the conversation toward mercy and family hardship. My mother grabbed my arm in the aisle afterward, her nails digging in. "Look what you have done," she hissed. "You could have kept this private, and we all would have been fine." My older sister stood beside Gabriel Mitchell with tears in her eyes. "The wedding is ruined now," she whispered. "All because you could not just sign the papers and let us help you." Gabriel looked between us, confusion turning to quiet disappointment, and I saw the moment he realized the version of my family my older sister had sold him was a lie. That night, back at the house, my father sat in his recliner, staring at the wall where his service plaque used to hang. He did not speak to me. My mother paced the kitchen, blaming everyone but herself. My older sister packed her things and left with Gabriel, who had quietly ended the engagement in the parking lot after hearing the full story. I stood in the doorway and felt the weight of every choice I had made. I could have pushed for criminal charges against my father for the embezzlement. I could have filed the complaint against Dr. Christopher Brooks with the medical board. I could have let the guardianship hearing go forward and fought it publicly with all the recordings and witnesses. But the thought of dragging Lucas's memory through months of court battles, of watching my father twist every detail into proof that I was the broken one, of losing the last fragile threads of the community I grew up in, felt like too high a price. So I made the painful choice right there in the hallway. I told my father I would not pursue anything further if he agreed to leave me alone forever. No more contact. No more attempts to control my life. He looked at me with something close to contempt and nodded once. "You were always the difficult one," he said, initiating one final jab, even in surrender. "Go back to your city life and pretend we never existed." I drove away from suburban Buffalo the next morning with nothing but the clothes I wore and the trust Lucas had protected. The 4 properties and nearly $6 million remained mine because of the irrevocable structure. But the victory tasted like ash. My father kept his freedom with only a quiet repayment plan and a tarnished reputation that the town slowly forgot. My mother and older sister never reached out again, choosing instead to rewrite the story as my ungrateful breakdown that destroyed the family. I returned to my gallery job coordinating exhibitions, but the loneliness settled in deeper than I expected. Sarah Reynolds and Emma Lawson checked in for a while, yet even their support faded as life moved on. My Aunt Nicole Price sent one last card wishing me well, but the distance grew. I established a small scholarship in Lucas's name for the young artists who felt unseen by their families. Yet every time I signed the paperwork, I felt the hollow echo of what I had sacrificed to keep it. The family I had fought so hard to escape remained unbroken in their own eyes, and I was left carrying the silence of a choice that saved my autonomy but cost me every remaining connection. Sometimes the hardest part of choosing yourself is realizing the family you lose was never really yours to begin with. I learned that protecting what Lucas built for me meant walking away from everything else, even when the cost was permanent, isolation, and the quiet regret that lingers on quiet evenings. I still wonder if there was another path, one where I could have forced real accountability without losing the last pieces of home. But my father's final words echo in my mind, and I know the price of peace was exactly what he always believed I owed him. Thank you for listening to my story and for staying with me through the hardest parts. If you have ever had to choose between fighting for justice and protecting your own peace, drop a comment and tell me what you decided. It helps to know I am not alone in this.